Here's an old friend, Jay Stanford. Now, Jay, you wear so many hats. You're the director of the environment, waste management, climate change, infrastructure services. I'm taking this all off the top of my head, but that's a lot of hats to wear. And, you've been at the city for how many years?
Geez, Glenn, you're dating me now, but yeah, it's just past 27 years now. So
that's right. And interestingly, starting, as we air this next week, there's going to be the Curb Hunger Food Drive, which is also going to be in its 27th year. Right. And so basically you came in at the city just at the time that this drive was getting started. I remember those early days, Jay. We would meet with you. We were just getting to know you. We would meet with you and your team. And you came on with this really interesting idea about blue boxes. Can you just go over that a bit with us?
Yeah, no, it goes back such a long time. Great memories, though. When you think of it, the recycling program has always been very popular in London. In fact, it's popular everywhere. Yeah. But a group of us sat down and said, hey, can we capitalize on that enthusiasm for recycling in London? And is there a way to sort of capture that enthusiasm and have people, donate non-perishable food products, but through the recycling system, and not inside the blue box. But what we decided was, could you put them beside the blue box? Yeah. And so, going back to that first year, I still chuckle because some say, well, where did this come from? And, when we do our drive, we get a chance to reminisce on that. And it's really important. But it just took a couple of interested parties to say, let's do something different, something that might be more convenient to Londoners to participate. And you and Jane and others in the food bank have been doing food drives for a long time. If we could do a new twist, it might be another way of capturing some more people. Yeah. And out of the gate, I think it had that unique aspect and remained unchanged for a number of years.
And it was unique in Canada. Others absorbed that idea and built it into their own systems. But I also remember that very first meeting we had when you said, Glenn, Jane, when would be the best time for us to have this drive? Do you remember that? And so we talked about how we only had like 3 food drives at that time all those years ago. So we talked about how sparse things would often get during the summer. We didn't have food drives during the summer. People went away and didn't donate as much, but the demand on us stayed the same. So it was you and your team that decided to do it roughly at this time of year to give us the resources to help get us through the summer. And that's exactly the way that it worked out. In fact, it helped us every summer through to the Thanksgiving food drive time, which kept us going. So even strategically in that way, it was a huge success for us. How do you see it changing, though, over the years? This is not so much a London Food Bank food drive. This is a city initiative in partnership with the food bank, but a whole bunch of other groups and organizations as well. How do you see it evolving as it has evolved over the course of the last almost 3 decades? What's your view of that?
Well, it's always had that environmental angle because we started with the recycling community. So we always knew there that there was that aspect that the folks in the environment community, they volunteer a lot, they care about the community. So it was really interesting because that's what you're looking for as well when you're involved with the food bank. You're dealing with volunteers. It's driven by volunteers, as is the environmental movement. So we were sitting back and saying, how can they really become connected? Yeah. And one of the themes that was so important was that all too often we forget about the environment. We love a clean environment, but we forget that it takes practice. You've got to do your part. I think the same thing can be said about poverty and some of the challenges that we're seeing in London right now and have over the years, and as well in other communities, is that we forget that those challenges exist. Maybe we try to block them out of our mind because they're not popular, let's face it. But it requires people, it requires volunteers to tackle these challenges, to help the most vulnerable in the community. So that alignment between the environment and those vulnerable in the community, I think has been this sort of interesting parallel for a number of years. But then rather than be a parallel, how could they be merged together? And that really became part of the theme of the food drive. And now we're calling it really a food campaign, that in June, capitalizing on, let's get some stuff, products, non-perishable food items onto the food bank shelves. But then it was kind of all dawned on us at the same time. What a wonderful time of the year. Yeah. It's not the end. It's actually the beginning.
Yeah.
And I think we started to say, how do we harness that energy? And I think the wheels just started turning in a number of areas because, Glenn, as you know so well from your efforts, local food is more nutritious. The food bank had a desire, as the community did, to bring more nutritious food to people. Food that you put on your plates, that we all put on our plates. That's what we want to start putting on plates of those that are in a vulnerable position, whether it's a couple times a year or have ongoing challenges. And so that merger of ideas and enthusiasm really started to take over. And we saw how a number of the environmental communities really became sort of mainstream. And some said, yeah, we can really see how these promotions can go hand in hand. And something into the summer months, yes, we have a campaign for about 7 to 10 days to raise awareness. When you think about it, the growing season lasts 3-4 months, and then you're into the harvest. And that's a wonderful thing. That's an experience on its own.
Yeah. Back in 2008, I got a letter from Al Gore. And he said, would you be willing to come to Montreal along with 99 other Canadians to get some training on the Inconvenient Truth? So that was the movie that he had done for, and won the Academy Award that year. And he had all these technology folks from Apple helping him to produce that and everything. So we all met at the Congress Center. David Suzuki was there. Business leaders were there. It was really fascinating. And so we spent the next 3 days going through this stuff, and at the end of the day he gave us this slide deck, which are all the pictures that he had in that movie, which was interesting. But I remember back then, Jay, I bring that up because we all sat there and talked in breakout groups and other things, and the feeling was the environment is huge. There's things like climate change and emissions and all of those things, and these are massive problems that we've got to take on. How are governments going to do that? How are businesses going to do that? Very little of it at that time was about how are communities going to do it. Mm-hmm. It seemed to be that we saw it as a huge problem and therefore required huge organizations to be able to do it. And it seems to me that one of the things that has really changed, in the last decade, especially when it comes to things like climate change or the environment, is exactly what you were talking about. The average citizen and the role that they play in it, the average business in a community, an organization in the community, it seems to me to have really democratized a lot more over the course of the last 10 years. Is that your sense?
Oh, definitely. The very notion that people do make a difference, it's easy to say, a little harder to do, but the rewards of doing volunteerism in London, it continues to grow. Now, whether it's involved in the environment, whether it's involved in healthcare, whether it's involved with those that are the most vulnerable, I'm not sure how it's actually all measured, but I know that the number of volunteers and generosity in this community has come out of the grassroots. Yeah. But when you start seeing community groups embracing this, when you start seeing businesses embracing it and building it into their operating platform, the giving back to a community of any size becomes part of their business strategy. And strategy is probably not even the right word. It's just their operating practice. After all, the employees most often live right in that community. So they see all the opportunities that exist by working with a business that wants to support things. Mm-hmm. And I fall back on so many things that we've done directly with the food bank, like the food campaign and the food drives. But then you move into other areas like London Clean and Green. It's also a partnership that continues to grow and embrace others. And whether you're directly involved or indirectly involved, the growth of that has been enormous, because I think that notion of collaboration and aligning resources and people and ideas wherever possible just strengthens a local community. And when I say a local community, We are a local community. We're made up of communities in London. There's, 440,000 of us. But when you break us down into neighborhoods, community associations, the sports and activity clubs that we all belong to, the amount of interaction is just so key. So it gives us that platform for us to continue to talk about these things, and most importantly, give back and strengthen the community that you want to live in and succeed in.
Yeah. It also takes us away from being, I remember reading a quote from Woodley, the basketball coach in the States, and somebody said, "What has basketball done for America?" Like, it's been fantastic. But I'll tell you what it's done. It's placed, these few people on a court and millions of people sitting there watching it, right? So all of these few people are doing all of this work, and all the rest of us are just looking to be entertained. It seems to me that what you are doing and what's happened around the climate change file lately is it's actually reversed that process. While the bigger ones sit down and decide what they're going to do about carbon emissions, and they meet in Copenhagen and all the other different places, cities are actually just getting with it. They're right on it. They're getting their citizens and organizations involved. When you were first started at the city 27 years ago, was climate change a phrase that was thrown around much then?
Not very much. In fact, dipping back in time, it was probably more the word global warming.
Yeah.
It was probably the phrase of the day.
Yeah.
And I think that was reasonably well understood. It was tied in with air quality. It was tied in with air pollution and all those stacks you'd see billowing out, contaminants into the air. And that was kind of the big theme. And then for years, you would hear that word global warming. Then I think it became more mainstream, and they really started to tie in the word climate. Yeah. And the very notion that things were changing. We're starting to see changes in our weather patterns. We're starting to see more severe weather. So the name really climate and climate change really has stuck now for quite some time. And, you having been in government, sometimes the word climate change becomes the word no one wants to talk about, and the government will sort of move it off to the side of the desk. Yeah. Other governments embrace it. And it's part of a democratic society that, we vote folks in. But one of the things with climate change, I think it's becoming more mainstream, and people are realizing there that it's happening right here in London. We have signs of it. We're starting to see our weather changing. We're starting to see more flooding. We're starting to see flooding occur at different times of the year. It used to only be in the spring. No, we will have a melt in the middle of January, and flooding occurs. Yeah. And you start scratching your head and saying, what's going on here? Well, our weather patterns are changing, and we need to be prepared for that. So when we say climate change, it gets into the bundle of things that we try to mitigate. We try to reduce the amount of our impact by doing things that are more sustainable and that essentially consume less fossil fuel. Yeah. Fossil fuel is what creates our challenges. Yeah. Then there's the whole other side, Glenn, climate change adaptation. Yeah. Preparing city, such as London, cities and municipalities in general, and businesses for the inevitable. Our weather is changing. We are going to have more severe weather. But now you look at the people within a city. Some are very capable of adapting to change. Some are much more vulnerable. And in fact, it's those that are vulnerable that are likely cause the least amount of greenhouse gas impact in the city, because they're already riding the bus. They're already cycling because they can't afford a vehicle, just as an example. So hang on a second here. Climate change really has to look deep into your community to find out who it actually impacts and who actually has the opportunity for greater changes. And awfully often it's the wealthier people. Yeah.
I think that climate change is kind of a weaponized word. And I don't mean that, detrimentally, but I remember when it first came out in the Al Gore movie and other things, it immediately became a political football. Right? And people started bantering it back and forth. It became highly divisive. But, I think that's changed over the years. We're starting to understand it better. But the things that aren't divisive are terms like local food, greenhouses, gardens, right? Gardeners, those kind of things, it seems to me, are non-threatening kind of terms that can be used about how people can get involved in the climate change effort to improve things that don't necessarily bring in all of these other things that cause people to separate or grow apart. I think, I hardly ever hear a criticism of the food bank warehouse, for instance, a greenhouse. Last week, I interviewed Becky Ellis from Urban Roots, and of course they're putting up a couple of larger greenhouses and other things, and it's awesome. But I don't get comments from people saying, "Well, that's terrible," right? or those kind of things. I think we're looking at those kind of things as ways in which we can actually, it's a ramp that we can all get on as citizens and be part of something. And we know it's not that big thing, but we also know if we all do it, it almost transcends the big thing. Right? Because it's all of us, and also we vote, we invest, we care for our communities, we volunteer, and if we can just become engaged, we can be all of those things. Do you not think that that's true? That I think is the Curb Hunger food drive has moved along here, and we're talking more and more about people growing in sustainable communities and garden cities and those kinds of things. It's actually a much friendlier environment.
Oh, it is. And, it's, I know the notion of urban agriculture, like some will say we're surrounded by farms, and we are.
Yeah.
But if you step back 30, 40 years ago, I bet you many people had little garden plots where they were growing vegetables in their backyard. It was more mainstream. We seem to have lost some of those good habits and practices over the years and over the decades. And, we started to rely on grocery stores. And of course, grocery stores are essential in a community.
Yeah.
But I think we've got probably a couple generations of kids that think that food comes from a grocery store, as opposed to that's the place you go to pick up the food that's come from elsewhere. And this is where the idea of urban agriculture is so important, because not only is it an activity, it's healthy, it takes place right in either your own backyard, right in your own neighborhood, could be with a local business, with a local church. But you say to yourself, the advantages of growing food locally. It reduces carbon emissions, greenhouse gases. It reduces the use of pesticides and fertilizers. It develops that strong connection with nature, with the environment. You see something grow. You plant it on a Monday, and maybe about a week later, you start to see something sprout. And then for a child, that's absolutely fascinating, because they saw dirt on a Monday, and by the weekend, something's growing.
Yeah.
So the learning opportunities are just enormous. So you package all that together, and then you realize, I'm also doing a climate action. Mm-hmm. So this is the thing here. When we talk about climate change, it's not necessarily these major changes and shifts. It's getting back to some of the basics.
Yeah.
And the enjoyable moments.
Yeah. And there's some things we have to adapt to. You're quite right. Like, I think one of the great initiatives that the food bank has done in our 37 years has been community refresh. So that was something we did in dialogue with you, and we were talking about landfills and how full they were getting with food, surplus foods from grocery stores and other things. And we sat down and we talked about it, and then we partnered together, you folks and us, and we met with the grocery stores, if you remember. And those managers were eager to work within their community. They weren't wild about the surplus or the waste either. So what we had to do was generate a way in which that food could get to the food bank and be given out to agencies and marginalized individuals. And it happened. It happened within a year with the help of groups like Business Cares as well that came along and bought the vehicles and other things. So the surplus thing or the waste thing is also a problem, right? But on the other hand, and that was a case in which the grocery stores themselves helped to lead that movement to help get some of that stuff done. So I think it's multidimensional, obviously, but the more players you can get into it, the better it is. And this food drive, the Curb Hunger food drive that you always organize with your team so well every year, it always has like tons of partners. Like, do you know how many you have this year? Any idea?
Oh, I think we're going to be probably at least 15 partners, and then you bring in all of the media. We typically track well into the mid-20s.
Yeah.
And then when you look at folks like Wayne Dunn and lending the logo of the business cares.
Yeah.
Now, we know that they run a mega food drive program every December. And it's unbelievable the reach that and then the enthusiasm and the business involvement. So just to basically capture and be associated with a proud name like Business Cares just helps to bolster our foundation here. So, when you think of number of members, it's almost some days, Glenn, it's kind of like who is not involved, right? It's another way of looking at it too, right? So no, we got a lot of proud partners, and a lot of the partners are coming now, as I've always said, out of the green side of it. This year coming on board will be a group called The Patch. They're very involved in local urban agriculture, as well as teaching people how easy it is to be involved. We also have coming on board the Western Fair District and their whole area called the Grove, which is all about simple agriculture and very complex and looking to the future. So these are two entities that said, geez, I really want to be involved because it really fits in nicely with the whole notion of urban agriculture. And if you look at Western Fair, its roots are in the agricultural area. And to date, they still are this urban agricultural center in the middle of a city, surrounded by paved parking lots. But when you peel away what's going on there, it is fascinating, and it's a growth area. And groups like the Patchwork out of there, Urban Roots from time to time gets involved with growing chefs. Food Bank, has a role in all of that too. So it's that way, once again, of knitting a community together. But I do want to chat a little more when you're ready about that Community Refresh program.
Yeah, let's do it now.
Oh, hey, because you're right. There was that movement on food waste, because food waste is shocking. Food waste, if you just look at the average household, about 35% of a garbage bag is food waste by weight. And that's people on average putting too much on their plate, scraping away what they don't eat. Unfortunately, that occurs. Cooking too much and then not properly storing it in a fridge. Poor meal planning. You go to a store and you don't realize something's already in your fridge and you want to buy 2 more. So what do you do when you come back? You discard the one that you think is gone, before a best before date. So those practices, we've got to change those. And in the city here, a big part of our program will be food waste avoidance as we head towards a green bin program. But remember, a green bin program takes away your avoidable food waste. So first, let's tackle food waste. But when it comes to what you mentioned on the grocery stores, so important what they got started back in 2017. The food bank very in tight with the grocery stores for all the food drives. And these are very gracious store managers doing their part day in, day out, but then going the next step, because they also saw what a waste of food going to landfill. And they said to themselves, there's got to be a better way of doing this. So a network's established. And I'm absolutely amazed what has occurred over the years, because in the first 2 years, about 20 tons of food was being rescued. When I say rescued, out the back door from the grocery stores and no longer into the bin, into a truck and being rescued and brought back over to the food bank. Pretty amazing, because now, so we're at 10 tons 4 years ago. It's now tracking at 20 tons per year, per month. So you multiply that. I'll tell you, when I just look down here at my stats, over 1 million kilograms, 2.3 million pounds of food rescued in just 5 years. And it's really coming up on the anniversary of that, because it started off as a pilot project. That on its own puts food on people's plates, nutritious food on people's plates, keeps stuff out of the landfill. But Glenn, as we talked about our climate change, the food distribution system and everything about food is responsible for 1/3 of the greenhouse gases worldwide. This is why we must all pay attention to food. We must consume the right amount. We can't waste any food. And we've got to find angles to make sure where if we have too much, there's ways to move it on to someone else that can use it. So the food and the climate change, the climate emergency go hand in hand. And refresh, community refresh, is just being a real key piece where we've been able to talk about that and highlight it as real action that produces results right here in London.
Yeah, and we should talk about this more, Jay, because it's actually an evolution of the human mind towards this. Jane and I have built two large composters in our backyard, right? But it makes it easier actually to waste. Because that's there, you can, you order too much food, or you bring home too much food from the grocery store, and you don't want it to go to the landfill. So you have the composter, and you can use the compost afterwards. But it's like we're still not even having green bins. I presume is the same problem. The fact that you've made it easier for people to get rid of their excess food that way is a wonderful thing, and it needs to be done. But really, it's all that excess food that we bring in and that we don't eat or get out there, whatever, actually ends up being very harmful to the environment. So it's one thing to be able to divert. It's another thing to be able to trim ourselves down and become more sustainable. And I would presume that this food drive, one of the advantages of it, is that it allows all of us, all the different associations, organizations, and others to begin to talk about this. So now that we are doing that, hopefully we'll learn, as I'm trying to learn better and better, and as you know better than I do, that food waste is a real problem, but we have something to do with that too. It's not just the big companies. We have something to do as citizens, and I think this food drive helps with that.
We want people to do their part at grocery stores and leave non-perishable food items right there in the bin. Yeah. But if that's not what they really want to do, this growing something in your own garden, participating in a community garden, yeah, participating with an Adopt a Plot over at the London Food Bank, those type of programs all exist. And it's that growing nature and getting back to nature that's also part of our food campaign. And then the other one too, Glenn, is we know financial donations go a long way because that gives the food bank flexibility. Yeah. And, it's interesting, like you serve customers, you serve people in need, but we have to meet their needs. And this is where you find that right balance to deliver the most nutritious packages to people to help them to get along here in London and eventually elevate themselves and move away from dependence on the food bank, which is what we all want.
Absolutely.
And that's the key part. And that's why, so in our case here, this food drive for, the 7 to 10 days, the food campaign over the summer months really has those building blocks to keep a conversation going. And I believe all our partners get involved and they say to themselves, I'm part of that network. Yeah. And that's the network here at the city. With one thing that we can really do well, it's to help to connect the dots, to help with the collaborations and to align different people.
And the drive itself goes from, is it June 7th to 17th? Is that correct?
That's right. We're starting on Wednesday, June 7th, and then we go through full weekend and then right through to the following Saturday, which will be June 17th.
Right. And it is about growing, doing whatever you can to try to assist in growing stuff. And then we will help all the different groups and agencies and others will help get it out to others. Also, many folks are taking it themselves to community resource centers and other things to help families that are coming in for assistance. But it's just more getting us into that frame of mind that what we grow, it doesn't just do good as far as the environment goes, but it also helps us as a community to take care of others that are marginalized. But it also gets us back to what we used to do 100 years ago as a civilization, which was connect ourselves to the land.
Well, that's right. And let's face it, we all have a right to clean water. Yeah. We all have a right to good, nutritious food. Yeah. Some have better abilities to do that. But as a good society, our strength is making sure all have that opportunity. And that takes tough work. But when we blend in all these other pieces, you're doing that challenging work or enjoyable work, but it's benefiting locally, people, it's benefiting the climate. So you're doing a couple actions at the same time. So this conversation that we're having right now and your viewers, the next thing they should be doing is having that conversation with their family and neighbors and saying, hey, you know what? I heard about this. I never knew I was doing this. I want to do more now. How can I get more involved?
But thank you and your team for all they're doing about this. This is a city initiative. They're trying to move us all